everyone, welcome back to another episode on Teens for Business. I'm your host, Jackie.
I'm Kywin.
And I'm Jack.
Thanks for joining us today as we reflect on the interview I conducted with Jeff Grimes, who is a tech entrepreneur and the founder of Shades. To everyone listening, make sure to go and check out Shades and that previous episode as well. So now let's just get right into our reflections with Jeff in that interview. So to start off, let's just talk about his company for a little bit. Shades, which is the site he started, covers basically everything from the news, pop culture, memes, and everything like that you see on social media, but it does so in a nonpartisan way and gathers everything together. So obviously we have so many different platforms like Instagram, Twitter, now known as X, and then we have like traditional news sites, CNN, etc. But Shades kind of like aims to pull everything together cohesively. And to ask you two, how do you feel about social media in that entire landscape that you see today? Are there any gaps, or like would you have any improvements to suggest, and just things like that? Or what do you think about the social media world that we have?
Yeah, I think with like the current state of social media, there's a lot of information that you have access to. Like at the same time, it's like almost information overload. So I think that in terms of what Jeff is doing with Shades, it's like they're addressing it by presenting, as I guess, content in a user-friendly manner, and by also like giving different viewpoints. I think he mentioned that a couple of times in that video, where he's just basically saying that this like this current generation compared to like past generations, I think we're a bit more open to different viewpoints. We kind of want to see what other people our age think of different topics as well. So I think in that sense that giving us access to a bunch of different news, but it's all like pieced and organized very well compared to like different social medias and news sites just making us read the whole thing and just seeing like one story just based off a lot of news sites just like post stories based on agendas. So that's kind of something refreshing to see with Shades.
Yeah, it's definitely very good that I think what Shades is doing, they're trying to compile all the news sources and they're trying to combine them into one cohesive story that describes like everything that's going on. Like unlike certain news sites, they just like follow the context of events. Maybe one event is happening and maybe another event's happening. And also over the past few years, we've seen some news sites such as like Fox News get criticized for appearing to sound a little bit like one-sided towards like a particular side. So definitely we need like that, like a mix of both, and then like a summary summarizing both viewpoints in order for the consumer or the target audience or whoever is like reading those news to get a better perspective of everything that's happening.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think also one thing about Shades is that like it does so in like pretty like chunk sizes. It's not like the entire article you have to read through. And I think that's like nice because some people like if it's a topic that you're like interested in, but like you're not really like wanting to read full on articles for, it kind of summarizes it for you in a way that's like easy to understand and very readable. Because sometimes like if you especially like if it's a more complicated issue and you like read a news story on it, it's like a little more difficult to understand because there's so much like complex background knowledge or things like that. But I think one thing Shay does is like it kind of simplifies it in a sense, and you get like the general summary, and then if you need more, obviously you can always like go back and Google things, but I think it does a really good job of giving you like the preliminary information, like giving you all sides, just like a wide basis of things. Um, and then, okay, moving on to our next question. So Jeff was a product manager at Google, and at Google, he mentioned he had like the ability to play around with some of Google's features and with test runs and different like little trials. And one of them he mentioned specifically was like the black hyperlink that went viral for like how people didn't like it, and that was where like if you clicked on a link and then you went back to it, it was black, and like that kind of just exploded on Twitter, and a lot of people weren't super happy with that decision. And so one, do you guys remember that? Because I remember like at the time I was like, oh, why is mine black? Because I think mine did turn black. But I had no idea like that's what happened behind it. And then also like how do you guys feel about that? Or also just different things about Google's little trial runs and like the small little tweaks that we might not even notice every day.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting about how he kind of talked about just like the very small changes has like drastic effects on what people are seeing and how they can even face like backlash just for something as small as like turning a link black. I mean, it's not like that's if you see a black link, you could think it's pretty strange, I guess. But I'm just saying, like, I guess like even companies, like every single choice that somebody makes within like these large companies, there's gonna be ripple effects. And I think he also Jeff added to his point by about talking about like the decisions that you make. You have to think about whether those are like one-way doors or like two-way doors. Because those one-way doors are kind of those decisions where like you can't come back from. Those are the major decisions that you have to like talk about with your team, discuss thoroughly, kind of think about if you truly want to do this or not. But something like the black links where you can just kind of experiment, and then if people don't like it, like what people they got the feedback, they went viral that nobody really liked this, so they can like go back and revert it. So I think in those kind of situations, it is good to experiment. Because if people like it, there's a lot of gain, but it's also like no long-term like bad consequences because you can just turn it back into what was original if people don't like it. So I just think that distinguishing between those two types of decisions allows companies to kind of make smart choices about tweaks and changes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I kind of remember a little bit of their experiment, but I think it was pretty short, so it didn't really live long in my memory. But anyway, so like when I like to be like really like specific when I like in my experience, like when we make like presentations or like pitches for companies or stuff like that. Obviously, maybe something small tweaks like maybe like the color background could like match with like I guess like company logo. That's something I'm pretty like specific with. And also those like again, like Kyvan mentioned, like the one-way, two-way doors that Jeff Grimes like talked about. He was inspired that was inspired by Jeff Bezos. As long in his like world, like he was working with software, obviously. So there's obviously a lot you can experiment with, especially on software, because it's easy to like revoke. Like all you need to do is like take out one line of code and then you or a few lines of code and you'll be fine. But then hardware, if you like again, like Jeff Grimes talked about, if you release a phone that's like missing a feature or has a faulty feature that doesn't necessarily work on all the phones or just like some of the phones, that's really like hard to revoke. And there's like a lot of things that need to be like changed. And that's obviously in hardware, that's more of like a one-way door, which really takes time to deliberate to like make that decision. But like in like software, it's okay to experiment because they're all more of like those like two-way doors that maybe this feature didn't work out the way we liked it. We can just like roll it back. And that's something that's a big takeaway that I took away from this interview.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think like also like that was one of the ones that didn't really work out, like the black link. Everyone for some reason really just didn't like it. And I guess like we're all like subconsciously like now when we think of a hyperlink, it's like, okay, yeah, it's blue, right? Like it wouldn't be any other color except maybe purple sometimes. But like that's what we just think about and what we associate. But like those little trials, like there's so many tweaks that Google makes all the time that we don't notice, and like we actually appreciate more that this was just one of the situations where it went viral, I think, and so that was one of the points he made too. So, and then also, and point about being like a product manager, he was talking about how that was kind of like he had an internship and then he had like a program thing, and then that's where he got into like the full-time like product manager role. Later on after university, and he was talking about how he had like a lot of opportunity to kind of have these trials and have the freedom to experiment with what he wanted to have his little space do. And I think that's something that's really interesting. Do you guys think that being a product manager would be a career you'd be interested in pursuing, trying out, or just investigating further?
Yeah, I definitely think it's interesting. I think he mentioned how product managers kind of like they don't really specialize like or have deep experience in kind of like one area, but you do have a lot of broad experiences that you kind of built up throughout your career and you just bring a broad variety of skills. And I think a story you talked about was like as a product manager, Jeff was working on the Discover feed and generating ad revenue, and then about how like he was in charge of like Google trusted him to kind of be that decision maker in terms of what they were doing, like with the black links, like that was his decision. He was trusted to be able to do that, and kind of that's the role that product managers have, and I think that's pretty interesting in the sense that you don't really need that much experience in one set of skills. I think he also said how he was very young, just out of college, and he was immediately able to jump into this role. So I think that's definitely something I could consider for the future, especially with like exploring what kind of job opportunities are available.
Yeah, I also think that being a product manager is definitely something that I could pursue in the future. Like obviously right now I have an interest in like business, but also I'm pretty much involved in a lot of economic stuff. I'm also very interested in data science and definitely a lot of technology and AI. So and I can definitely see like product managing and like product designing, which is also sort of a sector of product managing, as it's definitely a field. Product management is definitely like a field that like incorporates like all of those fields pretty broadly, but also like yeah. And then also I like how Jeff Grimes like talked about like there's like two sides to product management. There's like a strategic side that really like it's more of like understanding the landscape of like competitors, consumer demand, the right way to approach. That's like where you that's for me at least, that's I connected that with like doing like business, like product designing, and also like economics because you have to understand the marketing. I mean, sorry, the market that you're dealing with and what competitors are also in that like same field. And there's also like a tactical aspect of it where you have to like identify where you start by like identifying the idea, which you could have probably done in the strategic part, but you also have to show like be a leader in like how you execute that idea. Like with the team, you have to connect with researchers, investors, and like upper management, marketers, and other things like that. And then as like a product manager, you have to act as the leader to like push this idea through and make sure everything's like executed correctly. So that's something that could be that I look forward to that as a potential product manager.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And especially with Jack's point about how like it intertwines both parts of like business and also tech. And I think like the part about like when you're a product manager, it's not just like, okay, like think about what like how to improve the site itself or like how to improve a single feature. It's also looking at like um competitors and like what other people are doing and like what the market as a whole seems to like. It's not just very like solely focused on, okay, how do I make this change in the code, right? It's so much more about like the general landscape. Like, is this change even going to help us? Or like, is this change even going to be something that people appreciate? And so I definitely think that that's something really interesting because it kind of intertwines both sections of like the hard technical skills with more like cohesive or like softer skills. Um, and then also throughout the interview, I asked Jeff for some advice to teenagers interested in business, whether that be like going to business schools or like undergrad for business or having his own company or being a product manager at Google. And I know this is a topic we touch upon a lot, just like advice for people, but I always think it's like really interesting to reflect upon that. So do you guys have any advice or do you guys have any of your own like reflections on what Jeff mentioned throughout the podcast?
Yeah, I guess I'll first reflect on kind of what he said. I guess he was kind of talking about being experimental and iterating a lot, just getting a product out like pretty quick instead of just waiting and trying to find that perfect product, because a perfect product is never going to exist. Like once you get something out, you're going to get feedback about how to improve. I feel like if you're just like not putting it out there, you're not really holding yourself accountable to that, knowing there are mistakes, but you're going to be able to build off them. So I thought what he said was pretty useful. And just like, because he started Shades like what, less than a year ago. So just like, starting small, just as a co-founder, starting small, and you're going to continuously iterate and continuously get better. I think that's some advice that I have as well, just building off what he said. And one more thing, I guess, for aspiring entrepreneurs, just like continuously learning. I think in the world of business, it's essential to just kind of like learn as you go, because there's so many skills that you probably don't know yet and you just get just from working or just going through that experience. So just like always being ready to learn about something that you don't know and continuously trying, even if like something doesn't work out, you just move on to the next thing. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, those are some really like solid points. I'd also like to echo the a takeaway from one of my takeaways from Jeff Grimes' interview is that like start something small and like first like when you like start something small, you it feels like you want to like rush to the complete finalized product, but like that's gonna take a lot of time. You're gonna run into like a lot of obstacles that might stop you. And if you run into too many, you could potentially like say, oh, maybe we're just like done. We're gonna quit. But like that's obviously not what you set out to do. You set out to like make something. You want to make some impact, or you want to make some product. So instead, what potentially you want to do is like you start off with a minimum viable product that's like that you could like begin with, and obviously it's minimum viable. So it's like there's a lot to build on it. It has like minimal like features, but that's okay because it'll based on the test that you can do with it, and that's another thing that Jeff Grimes mentioned. You can see how the consumer is going to react to that, and that can definitely help you gauge, oh, what features do you need to add in the future? Are these features good? Maybe we could take something out. So that is definitely something that I took away from Jeff Grimes like episode. In addition, like my own advice, I feel again like what Kyvan said, like learning more about like the industry, just like tracking like a lot of like news. You can like also like in my experience, I think brainstorming is also like pretty hard to do because there's like a lot of things you could like incorporate. So definitely once you like started brainstorming, I one of my pieces of advice is to like be flexible because that might change really easily. And like obviously if you like zone in on something, you don't you can like lock in on like contributing something, but also you need to be considerate of like other like things that could impact your like path, and then you have to like open up to that, and you have to be like flexible for your like business or um venture to like succeed and make an impact. So that is some advice that I have.
Yeah, those two were also some of the things I was thinking about as well, and kind of related to the point about like just getting a product out. I think that's something like some people might have some difficulty with. But like I think that's super important because I know like a lot of the times whenever we have like, especially like when it's something really big, like a whole company or like a whole product, it's not just like something you're doing for fun. It's not just something like very small on the side, right? It's like something you actually want to succeed. And I think like when we're in that mindset, a lot of people want to make that first product as good as possible. Like if it's not perfect, okay, well, I'll make it perfect. I'll spend even more time trying to make it perfect. And like that perfectionist mindset. And I think that's something like obviously you should try to make it good or like put your effort into it. But at the same time, I think he makes a really good point on like don't just like cushion yourself into like, okay, I have to make this perfect product the first time around. And because one, when you do that, you're like Kaiwan also said, like you're not gonna actually get a perfect product the first time or like really at any point because you're always continuously trying to change it or like trying to improve it. So like that's just A, not gonna happen, but B also because if you make a product you really, really like spent so much time in, but then in the second stage you get all this feedback and you're like, well, I already did all this stuff in the first stage. Like I think it's basically almost perfect. And then it becomes a lot more like of a mindset thing because you're like, oh, but I have to change this, but I don't know if I want to do that. And I think that's like another point about like his thing of just get it out, like have something like a minimal, like viable product, like Jack said, the MVP, and then just get feedback because that way you don't have the future like mental roadblocks. And I think that's something that's very important and useful when keeping in mind of like how do you actually get a successful business, not just like having your first step out into the world, how to like make it continuously sustainable throughout different iterations. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you guys all so much for joining us. And if you haven't yet, go make sure to check out our episode interviewing Jeff and also Shades as well. So it was incredibly fun to film with him, and I hope that watching these episodes and interviews are just as fun. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next episode.